I'll explain to you pulse width modulation, and that is related to the first lab that you're struggling with for this particular block. So, what is pulse width modulation? So, I really like this particular picture a lot. You can find it in the data sheet, and this is what we will be working with. So, what do you see here? So, first of all, we're talking here about one of the timers. Each timer can be used to generate a pulse width modulated signal. So how does that work? So the idea is that you can manipulate the counter that is being incremented from 0 all the way to some top value, then it's cleared back to 0, goes to top, clears back, so you can create a sawtooth behavior. And as you can see, the sawtooth actually may have different widths. For example, over here we see that the sawtooth is much smaller, and then it is much bigger again than even what was seen here before. So how can you change that? Well, the idea is that you can create, you can program the counter, the timer device, in a way that on the fly you're going to manipulate the OCR1A. So what you can do is, you can set the OCR1A to a certain value, for example here, or this level, or that level, or this level, and so on. And when it matches that particular register, the counter will clear itself back to 0 and starts incrementing over time again until it matches OCR1A. So what I can do is, that in my program, my actual program, I can change this particular register value. And that means that this counter will behave in this sort of different way. I've just created new register values for OCR1A when I made a change from this sawtooth to this sawtooth. I changed the level of OCR1A from something that was first a bit higher to something that is much smaller. Now it is also possible to set another register, the OCR1B, and also compare the counter against this register. And that will help you to create some kind of a block form, a block waveform. So let's have a look at this particular sawtooth, and that is going to be translated into a high signal at the start, and then a low signal, a low value at the end of the sawtooth. And the idea is that this is going to be transmitted over a pin, which is called OC. For example, we use timer 1, say OC1. And if we, for example, use channel B, then we can push this particular waveform, this blocked waveform, over to OC1B, and that you would find in your datasheet to be pin B, PD2. So it is possible to take such a sawtooth and not just compare against this top value, which will then clear the counter back to 0, but also in the meantime compare against this other register called OCR1B. Now the counter will still increment, so nothing changes, but it is an indicator to the hardware device to flip on this channel, so on this pin PD2, the high value to a low value. Once you get to the end of the sawtooth, so you match OCR1A, then not only the counter is being cleared back to 0, but also the low value is being pushed up to the high value. So now what you can see is you create this kind of block waveform that is actually variable, because in my main program I can actually change myself the register value of OCR1A on the fly. That creates larger sort of sawtooths or smaller ones, and I can also change the OCR1B so that maybe the transition does not always happen in the middle, but maybe at some point it happens here quite at the start of this sawtooth, so that you see a small portion to be high and then a longer portion to be low. Or over here, the OCR1B is actually set equal to OCR1A, so that means that you do two matches, that a essentially cancel one another out, you do not normally you would clear the counter to 0, which is what you do here as well, but also set from low to high, and then when you but it was already high, so you would not go from back to low and immediately back to high. So if the OCR1A and the OCR1B are equal to one another, then nothing really happens and you just see a high value all the way through. Now, the two modes in which I could forward this particular signal to this pin, I can do it in normal mode, or which is what is called non-invertible mode, or I can program the hardware to say, well, I actually like you to always flip the signal, and we call that inverting mode, and then effectively flip this particular signal into its complement. So that means that if I see a sawtooth over here, in normal mode I start with high and then low. In inverting mode I will start with low and then high. So let's keep this structure in mind and then see how we need to program the different registers in order to make this happen. So the main idea there is that if you want to play music, for example, you will be able to change the frequency by changing OCR1A, which means it's the width of a sawtooth, and you change it. And at the same time, you will also change the duty cycle, which is the fraction of the time that you are high in a sawtooth compared to the complete length of the sawtooth. So that will effectively translate into some kind of a sound that you can hear if you would, for example, operate a buzzer or something of that form. So let's talk about that. So what is that frequency in actual time? Well, I use, of course, the CPU clock. I have some prescaler that I've set for that particular timer that I'm using. So I'm defining that. And the sawtooth itself has a width of 1 plus OCR1A counter ticks. So that's why I'm defining by 1 plus OCR1A. And that will give you effectively the frequency at which these sawtooths appear. So for a moment, let's assume you're not going to change OCR1A or OCR1B on the fly. Let's assume they're completely constant, and in that sense I would generate this blocked structure on and on and on. So this will repeat itself, and so forth. So then the frequency that this period, that this block is being reproduced, right, is then equal to this particular, can be calculated by using this equation. The duty cycle, the amount of time within, the fraction, I should say, of time within such a block, within such a period, that the value is high, is then 1 plus OCR1B divided by 1 plus OCR1A, because 1 plus OCR1A is actually the length of the sawtooth, while 1 plus OCR1B is the portion over here until it matches that particular value in that register, that the output signal is high. Okay, so for example here, if we're thinking about 523 hertz C note with a certain particular clock cycle, say 60 megahertz, and no prescaler, then if I want to create like 523 hertz, I need to set the OCR1A register to something like this. So you can do these types of calculations using this particular formula, and if you want to have a specific type of duty cycle, you can compute it like that. Now, let's focus on timer 1 here, right? Timer 1 has a lot of possibilities for doing PWM, and we're not going to discuss pretty much any of them. We only discuss the fast PWM waveform. So let's read this table. First, we have seen this table before, when we talked about a normal use of the clock. So it's just incrementing all the way up to the end, and it overflows and keeps on going. We talked about CTC, which is when you match, so the top value of your sawtooth is given by the register value OCR1A, and when you need that, then you clear the counter back to 0, so that's what this particular mode means, and you continue like that. So that was the CTC mode. And now we're talking about fast PWM. Now we need to set all those bits corresponding to these positions in that particular control register that is associated with that to 1, so 4 ones. Now the top, so the waveform that you're generating, like the counter TC and T1, will continue till OCR1A, when it's cleared back to 0. There's also the update of the channel OCR1B, for example. That's what we've been talking about. That was pin B2. And that is being updated on the bottom because you effectively invert the signal from low back to high. And also, there's another column over here that indicates a certain flag that will be set on the top. But generally, you can, and that's what we've been talking about, enable a bunch of interrupt service routines that can help you out with programming this PWM. So this is what we're going to have. Now we're also going to, in our example, so let's go back just very quickly over here. Let's say we're interested in OC1B. That would mean that I want to set COM-B1 and COM1B0. So these are specific positions in the control register that we'll see in a moment, because I want to clear OC1B on a compare match, and so forth. So in the way that we have been discussing in the first slide that I that I've been talking about this right now, and I want to have non-inverting mode. So we're not going to use any pre-scaling, say we don't want this, but again, you can look at this particular table, you can see how you would want to set the pre-scaling. So here are the control registers. We have the TCCR1A, the TCCR1B, and we have seen this before, right? So earlier, when we were interested in, say, CTC mode, we had a different bit assignment to those positions that indicate a kind of waveform or a wave generating mode we're interested in. Right now we say fast P pulse width modulation, so we put ones in all of those. We have no pre-scaling, so we set 0, 0, 1. And we want to have an output over the OC1B channel in non-inverting mode, and that is set by setting a 1 and a 0 on those positions. Now, in the mask register, I can put a 1 and a 1 here to enable these two interrupt service routines. So here we have an interrupt service routine, right? If you write that, it will be triggered when I see a match with the OCR1B register. So the cool thing about that is that if that match, as soon as that match happens, the ISR is being called, and in that ISR, I can change my OCR1B. So in that way, I can on the fly change the OCR1B based on some other variables that are globally defined, and depending on what kind of musical instrument you want to play, for example, you will indicate then to the ISR through these global variables how you would like to change OCR1B. So that will change the duty cycle. Then we also have another interrupt service routine that will be called, if it's set right here, if it's enabled, that will be called on a match with OCR1A. And that actually sets the frequency, right? So in that ISR we can change the OCR1A. So by doing this we can actually play music. That is possible. So that is how that works. So what happens then is that if there is this compare, if the counter 1 output compare D match happens, then this particular flag is set, and then the interrupt service routine is called. Or here, when the compare A match happens, the OCF1A flag is set, and then the ISR is called accordingly to that one. So I'm just adding this particular register over here to indicate that these flags that I'm just talking about, when those matches do happen, you can actually find those in this particular register, the TIFR1. Okay, so just to give you a full picture here. Now, what kind of interrupt service routines do you actually need to write? So we go to this particular link, look at this document, look up our own Atmega processor that we use, and we'll figure out that we need to actually program this particular timer 1 compare A factor and timer 1 compare B factor interrupts. So here are the two that we would like to program. Now, how can you use this interrupt service routine? So I just explained that you can use it to change the register values, OCR1A and OCR1B, to change the frequency and duty cycle. And that allows you to really modulate the output signal over that pin, and then that will also give you, if hooked up with the right peripheral, give you the music that you would like to hear. But now suppose that peripheral, say the buzzer here, is not connected to PB2, which stands for the OC1B channel, right? But say some other pin, say PB4. Then what I could do is that in those ISRs, as a second row for those ISRs, I can actually toggle the value on the pin PB4. And that will allow me to hook up a peripheral like a buzzer to a different pin by using these interrupt service routines. So that's kind of nice to know. Alright, so a much easier solution that you've seen earlier, so I'd like to repeat that, was for timer 2. Remember, we can here it's given for timer 1, but for timer 2 at a time, we were giving a perfectly symmetrical block waveform where the duty cycle is 50%. Half of the time you're giving a high and half of the time a low. And what we saw was that we can also program this waveform by setting the 0001, that is CTC mode, so you have a sawtooth that clears on the top. Then you match the OCR1A register. And again, you can, for example, use no prescaler, and we can simply toggle the OC1A channel on a compare match if we program this particular to 0 and 1. So let's say we're now interested in OC1A instead of OC1B. Well, then we could just, so here it is, so we want to have 0, 1, 0 and 1, so that would be clear the OC1A on compare match. No, we want to have to toggle the OC1 on compare match, so we have a 0 over here and a 1 over here, exactly. Good. So that was explained in the previous lecture using timer 2. So now you see how we can generalize this concept completely by using the more advanced options that you have to program, say timer 1, with more complex pulse width modulated signals. So pretty cool. So one thing to remember though is when you are actually modifying the OCR1A in this particular interrupt service routine, be very careful not to modify OC1A to a value that is less than the current value of your counter 1, the timer 1. Why? Because then the compare match will only happen once this is incremented, is cleared at its top maximum value of 2 to the power 60 minus 1, and then increments up to this particular value. So all of a sudden you see a huge amount of time span that you need to wait till this T0 and T1 is actually going all the way to the top and then comes down at the moment when it hits its maximum possible registers value of 2 to the power 60 minus 1. So when you translate it into actual music, it would become a glitch. So you do not like that. So let's do an example calculation. So let's assume we have a clock of 20 megahertz. I want to have a 24 millisecond period and a duty cycle essentially of 1/3, so an active high for 1/3. And I want to output that signal on OC1B. So the first question is, what kind of prescaler am I going to pick? So let's do a couple of calculations. It turns out you can use any of 8, 64 and 256, but I will give the calculation right here. So the first thing is that no prescaling does not work. Why? Well, if I divide the CPU clock by just 1, so no prescaling, then 24 milliseconds is way much more than counting timer 1 all the way from 0 to its top value to the power 60 minus 1, because those 65,000 ticks correspond to much too little time if I don't do any prescaling. So I need to prescale it somewhat. So for example, I can prescale to 8. Then we get 8 divided by 20 megahertz equals 0.4 microseconds per TCNT1 tick. So every single increment of TCNT1 is taking 0.4 microseconds. So what does that mean? It means that 24 milliseconds is equal to, well, divided 24 milliseconds divided by 0.4 microseconds is equal to 60,000 ticks. So by setting OCR1A to 60,000 minus 1 and setting OCR1B to 20,000 minus 1, we get the right period, exactly 24 milliseconds, and also a duty cycle of 1/3. Turns out that if you do the same calculation with the prescale of 64, well, as you can see, I'm just repeating those sentences. You just plug in the new numbers and you get 3.2 microseconds per tick, which means that we need 7,500 ticks for a period of 24 milliseconds. And so we can set OCR1A to 7,500 minus 1. And if you do OCR1B to 2,500 minus 1, we get the exact precise duty cycle as well as the right period. And you can check for yourself. If you use a prescale of 256, we can again get a precise solution. What happens if you do 1024? Well, in that particular case, a tick, so how many ticks do we then need in a 24 millisecond period? It turns out it's not going to be an integer. It's 468.75. So it's not a precise integer, and it means that you can only approximate the period to 24 milliseconds, so it's slightly imprecise, a tiny bit. And also turns out that the best possible OCR1B value of 155, you can get approximately a duty, approximately 1/3 of the time you will be high. So only the 8, 64 and 256, according to his calculations, right, give you the exact results. So hopefully this will help you to calculate these things through, but that will help you to set the prescaler according to what you need. Okay, besides setting the prescaler, what other registers do we also need? Well, it turns out that obviously we need to set the pin B2, which is equal to OCB1, to an output. So that's what we do here. We need to make sure that we are in non-inverting mode. We have fast PWM, that's those 4 positions, and we have a prescaler of 8 in this particular case. That's what we choose. So this is effectively how you can program this kind of stuff. So this stops the PWM part of the lecture. Any questions about this? And during the lab we can talk more, of course, about all of this.